The wind screamed across the frozen moon, sharp as a knife. Ethan pulled his coat tighter. But the cold still bit through the fabric. His transport shuttle had crashed hours ago, leaving him with nothing but a small pack, a sleeping bag, and the clothes on his back. The night was coming fast. And here, night meant deadly cold. If he didn't find shelter soon, he would not see the morning. The snow crunched under his boots as he searched the rocky slope. The sky above was dark blue, with two pale moons peeking through the clouds. Ethan's breath came out in white clouds, and each step felt heavier. He was about to give up and dig himself a snow trench when he heard something, a faint sound. Almost like a whimper. He froze, listening. There it was again, a soft cry carried by the wind. He followed the sound, pushing through a drift. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. A small figure crouched under a ledge of rock, trying to hide from the wind. It was not human. The skin had a faint bluish glow under the moonlight, and the long, thin fingers clutched a piece of torn cloth. Large eyes, almost too big for the small face, stared at him with fear. She was shivering so badly, her teeth chattered. Ethan raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "Hey," he said gently, "I'm not here to hurt you." The alien girl pressed herself against the rock, her eyes darting toward the snow. Behind him, as if expecting someone else to appear, when she spoke, her voice was broken and halting. "Please, don't hurt me." Her comment was rough, like she had only learned a few words. Ethan's first thought was how cold she looked. Her clothes were nothing more than thin rags, barely covering her small frame, in this temperature. She had minutes, maybe an hour before. She froze. "I have a sleeping bag," Ethan said, pointing to his pack. "It's warm. You can share it with me." The girl's eyes widened, and she looked uncertain. He could tell she didn't trust him, but her body shook harder with every gust of wind. Finally, she moved, stepping closer. Her feet made no sound in the snow, and she was lighter than he expected when she stumbled toward him. Ethan quickly unrolled the sleeping bag and crawled inside, holding it open for her. She hesitated at the entrance, staring at him like she was about to step into the mouth of a predator. But then, with a small breath, she slid in beside him. The warmth spread quickly once they were both inside. Her skin was cool to the touch at first, but slowly warmed against his body. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, unexpectedly, she moved closer, much closer, pressing her forehead to his chest. Ethan blinked in surprise. He had expected her to curl up away from him, but instead, she clung to him like she had known him her whole life. He could feel her breathing against him, fast at first. Then slowing, she murmured something in a language he didn't understand, the words soft and rhythmic, almost like a chant. It didn't sound like fear, it sounded like she was saying a prayer. Ethan didn't know what to say. So he just lay still, letting her rest. Outside, the wind howled, and snowflakes pattered against the rock. He was glad they had found at least some shelter. But then, far in the distance, a different sound broke the night, a deep, echoing howl. It made the girl tense instantly, her fingers tightening on his coat. She whispered one word in common danger. Ethan's muscles tightened. He didn't know what creature had made that noise, but it was close enough for her to hear it through the storm. He glanced at her, but she kept her eyes shut, still holding on to him. He wondered who she was, how she had ended up here, and why she was alone in the deadly cold. But before he could ask, she spoke again. This time in clear words. "If you keep me warm, I will keep you alive." Ethan frowned, confused. What could a small, half-frozen girl do to keep him alive on a moon full of predators and freezing winds? She didn't explain, and soon her breathing slowed as she drifted into sleep. Ethan lay awake, staring at the dim glow of her skin in the dark. The sound of the wind was constant. But now he also listened for that distant howl. Something told him this night was not the worst danger they would face. Tomorrow, he would have questions, many questions, but for now, he just kept her close. Somehow, he knew letting go would be a mistake he could never undo. Ethan woke to the sound of snow sliding off the rock above them. For a moment, he thought he had dreamed the whole thing. But then, he felt the weight against his chest and the warmth that didn't belong to him. The alien girl was still curled up in the sleeping bag, her face pressed into his coat like it was the safest place in the galaxy. She was awake, but she didn't move away. Her large eyes stared up at him, and for a second, he expected her to pull back in fear now that the cold had eased. Instead, she moved even closer, wrapping her thin arms around him as if she never wanted to let go. Ethan blinked, unsure of what to say. He had offered her warmth to keep her alive, but this was something else. She whispered in her broken common, warm, safe. Stay. Ethan tried to smile, but there was an uneasiness in his chest. It wasn't that she was dangerous, not in the way she looked at him, but it felt like she had already decided he was hers. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his coat, like she was afraid he would disappear if she let go. Outside, the wind had softened, but the sky was still heavy with clouds. Ethan knew they couldn't stay here all day. He needed to find better shelter, food, and a way to signal for rescue. When he tried to pull himself out of the sleeping bag, she tightened her grip. No. Don't go, she said quickly. Ethan gently loosened her arms. We have to move, or we'll freeze when night comes again. She hesitated, then slowly nodded. They packed what little they had. And he noticed how she kept close, her steps almost matching his every few minutes. She would glance behind them as if something was following. When he asked, she only said one word: hunters. Ethan didn't like the sound of that. By midday, they reached a frozen ridge that gave them a wide view of the valley. It was beautiful white snow, jagged mountains, and rivers of ice that glistened in the pale sunlight. But it was also silent, too silent. Ethan's instincts told him they were not alone. The girl seemed to feel it too, her blue glowing skin dimming as she pressed closer to him. They crossed the ridge carefully, but halfway down, she suddenly stopped, her head tilted, her ears twitching slightly. Ethan couldn't hear anything at first, but then it came a faint hum in the air. It grew louder, mechanical, unnatural. A shadow passed over the snow. Ethan looked up and saw a small drone hovering above, its lens blinking red before he could react. The girl moved in a blur. She darted forward, placing herself between Ethan and the drone. Then she opened her mouth and let out a sound high, sharp, and almost painful to hear. The air seemed to vibrate. The snow under their feet shivered, and the drone jerked in the air before dropping into the snow. Its lens cracked. Ethan stared, his ears ringing. What was that? He asked. The girl didn't answer right away, her breathing heavy, as if the effort had drained her. Finally, she whispered, I said, I will keep you alive. Ethan realized this was what she had meant last night, before he could ask more. She pointed to the sky. Tiny shapes were moving above the clouds, more drones. Maybe ships? Her voice dropped to a whisper. They found me. Ethan's stomach tightened. Whoever they were, they clearly weren't here to help. The girl's pace quickened as they moved across the snow. Ethan followed, trying to match her strange, light steps. Several times, she stopped to listen, pulling him behind rocks or into shallow caves, each time within moments. He would hear something, footsteps crunching in the snow, the hum of another drone, or a distant howl that made his skin crawl. By the time the sun began to set, they had reached a narrow canyon. The walls were high, shielding them from the wind, but also trapping them inside. Ethan didn't like it, but the girl insisted, safe here. For now, she sank to the ground, her small body trembling without a word. Ethan unrolled the sleeping bag again. She crawled inside without hesitation. this time pressing her back against him. It was strange she acted like they had always known each other in the fading light. Ethan studied her more closely. Her skin was smooth, almost too smooth, with faint, glowing lines running along her arms. Her eyes were bright and reflective, catching even the smallest light. And those sounds she could make, they were powerful enough to shatter machines. She was clearly more than just a lost child. As night wrapped around the canyon, she spoke. Again, tomorrow. They will come for me. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could feel her hands tighten on the sleeping bag's fabric. Why? He asked. She was silent for a long time, then whispered, because I am the last. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. He kept one hand near his sidearm and his eyes on the shadows. Whatever was coming for her was getting closer, and if they found her, they'd find him too. One thing was certain, sharing that sleeping bag had been the start of something far bigger than he had imagined. Ethan woke before sunrise, the cold air biting at his face. The alien girl, Sierra, was still pressed against him in the sleeping bag, her breathing soft and even. For a moment, everything was quiet. And he almost believed the danger had passed. But then he saw them deep claw marks in the snow just beyond the canyon wall. Something had been here in the night. Close enough to touch, Ethan's pulse quickened. He gently shook Sierra awake, and her eyes opened instantly. Alert, like she had not really been sleeping, she glanced at the marks, and her expression hardened. Night fangs, she said simply, her voice low. Predators. Ethan scanned the ground, seeing the tracks lead toward the east. Will they come back? He asked. Sierra nodded. If they smell warmth. They follow for days. Ethan didn't like the sound of that. They had to move before the creatures returned and before the hunters in the sky found them. Sierra led the way through the narrow canyon, moving quickly but carefully, her steps barely left a trace in the snow. Ethan followed, his boots crunching with every step. He noticed she paused often, tilting her head like she could hear things far away several times. She stopped him from walking into open areas. Once, she pulled him into a crack in the canyon wall, just as a drone passed overhead. By midday, they reached a frozen stream winding through the mountains. Sierra knelt beside it, brushing snow away from a section of ice. She placed her palm flat against it, enclosed her eyes. After a few moments, she stood. Safe path under ice, she said, pointing to a hidden tunnel entrance nearby. Ethan frowned. How do you know? She tapped the side of her head. I hear water and air moving. The tunnel was cramped and dark, the ceiling so low that Ethan had to crouch. But it kept them hidden from the open sky. The air smelled stale but was warmer than outside. They walked for what felt like hours. The only sound, the crunch of their steps and the distant drip of melting ice. At last, they emerged into a wide cave filled with dim blue light. The walls sparkled with frozen crystals, and in the center was a cluster of old supply crates. Ethan hurried over and pried one open, finding dried food packs inside. They sat together and ate in silence. Sierra nibbled slowly, her eyes never leaving the cave entrance as they finished eating. A faint rumble echoed through the ice. Sierra stiffened. They're here. Ethan stood, gripping his sidearm. The hunters. She nodded. They have my scent. And yours now. Moments later, shadows flickered across the cave walls. 3 drones floated in, scanning with red beams. Ethan raised his weapon, but Sierra caught his arm. No sound, she whispered. I will do it. She stepped forward, her small frame tense. Then she opened her mouth and released a sound unlike anything Ethan had heard. Deep, sharp, and vibrating through the very walls, the drones wobbled in the air, their lights flickering before they crashed to the ground. The cave rang with the aftershock of her voice. Ethan's ears buzzed, but he couldn't deny how effective it was. Sierra leaned against the wall, breathing hard. That "We'll call more," she said between breaths. Ethan knew she was right. They had to move again. They slipped out of the cave through a narrow side passage. Climbing over frozen ridges and pushing through snowdrifts, the sun was low when they finally reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley in the distance. Ethan spotted movement, dark shapes cutting through the snow. Moving fast, he counted at least 6 of them. The hunters, Sarah, crouched beside him, her voice tight. "They will not stop. They want me alive. But they will kill you." Ethan glanced at her. "Then we make sure they never catch either of us." They slid down the ridge and into a forest of ice-covered trees. The air was quieter here, the thick trunks blocking the wind. Sarah seemed to relax slightly, but her eyes still scanned every shadow. Ethan noticed she always kept herself between him and the direction of the hunters. It was like she was protecting him instead of the other way around. By the time darkness fell, they found another rocky outcrop to camp under. Ethan unrolled the sleeping bag, and without a word, Sarah slid inside. She pressed close again, but this time her hand rested lightly on his chest. "You are warm," she murmured. "Warm." Is life? Ethan closed his eyes. But his mind stayed awake. The hunt had begun, and every step now would decide whether they lived or died, far away in the valley. The hunters moved steadily through the snow, and above them, more drones joined the search. The cold moon was vast. But it was only a matter of time before the paths of predator and prey crossed again. The first sign of danger came with the sound of the snow cracking. Ethan opened his eyes and saw Sarah sitting upright in the sleeping bag. Her head tilted, listening. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and her fingers tightened around the fabric. "They are close," she whispered. Ethan grabbed his pack and sidearm, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. The wind was still. But that made it worse. Every small noise carried far. Somewhere beyond the rocks, footsteps crunched, slow and steady. Not the light tread of an animal, but heavy, deliberate steps. The hunters. Sarah crawled out of the sleeping bag, moving with a silent grace that made Ethan feel clumsy. "Follow," she said, her voice almost too soft to hear. They slipped between the rocks and down a narrow slope, the snow squeaking under their boots. Ethan tried to match her quiet movements, but his heavier steps seemed too loud in the stillness. They entered a frozen gully where the moonlight barely reached. Sarah paused at every corner, her body tense like a coiled spring. Ethan could feel the urgency in the way she moved, no wasted steps, no hesitation. Then a beam of red light swept across the snow ahead. Ethan ducked, his back pressing to the ice wall. A drone floated into view, scanning, its lens rotating with a faint hum. Before Ethan could raise his weapon, Sarah held out her hand. "Not yet," she breathed. The drone hovered closer, and just as its beam touched Ethan's boot, Sarah released a sharp, short sound. The drone jerked in the air, its sensors glitching, and it drifted away like it had lost its target. Ethan let out the breath he was holding. They continued moving, but the sounds behind them grew louder. More footsteps, more crunching snow. Then came a howl, deep and bone-shaking. Ethan had heard it before, the night they first met. Sarah didn't look back, but her pace quickened. "They release the night fangs," she said. "They will track the heat of your body." Ethan felt the weight of the words. Night fangs, fast. Silent killers were now part of the hunt. The gully ended abruptly, forcing them to climb a ridge of jagged ice. Ethan hauled himself up, his gloves scraping on the frozen surface. Sarah moved ahead of him with effortless speed, her small frame slipping through gaps in the ice. At the top, the land opened into a vast frozen plain. No cover, no shadows, just open snow under the pale light. Ethan cursed under his breath. Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "If we cross fast, they cannot catch us before we reach the ice forest," she said, pointing to dark shapes far in the distance. They ran, their footsteps sending up clouds of powdery snow. Ethan's lungs burned from the cold air, but he kept pace with her. Behind them, shapes moved at the edge of the plain, tall figures in dark armor, their helmets reflecting the moonlight, and farther back, low, fast-moving blurs streaked toward them. Night fangs. The hunters raised weapons, red energy bolts slicing through the night. Snow exploded around Ethan's feet. He dove behind a low drift, Sarah following. She turned her head toward the hunters and let out a piercing, long sound that made the air vibrate. One of the hunters stumbled, clutching at his helmet, but the others kept coming. "We move," Sarah said quickly, pulling him to his feet. They dashed across the last stretch of open ground, the forest of ice looming closer. The night fangs were faster. They closed the distance in seconds, their glowing eyes fixed on the heat of Ethan's body. One leaped jaws wide. But Sarah spun and released another sonic burst. The creature yelped and crashed into the snow, shaking its head. They reached the first ice trees, their massive trunks glittering with frost. The thick forest slowed the hunters and broke their line of sight. Sarah led Ethan through winding paths only she seemed to know. The sound of pursuit faded slightly, replaced by the creaking groan of the ice around them. Finally, they stopped in a hollow surrounded by thick walls of frozen crystal. Sarah knelt, pressing her hand to the ice. "Here." "They cannot hear us," she said. Ethan crouched beside her, trying to catch his breath. "They'll still search," he said. "Yes," she replied, "but they will not find us before light." For the first time that night, Ethan saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not fear, but determination. She looked at him and said, "You could leave me, and they might let you live." Ethan shook his head. "Not happening." Her gaze softened, and for a brief moment, the cold seemed less sharp. Far above, the hunters regrouped at the edge of the forest. Their leader raised a hand, signaling the search to continue at dawn. The night fangs prowled the tree line, restless. The chase wasn't over, had only been paused. Ethan and Sarah sat in the hollow, their backs against the ice. The air was still, but both knew it wouldn't last. Tomorrow, the hunters would push harder, and the distance between predator and prey would close again. The hollow was quiet, the ice walls glowing faintly with trapped moonlight. Ethan sat with his back against the frozen wall, his breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. Sarah sat across from him, legs pulled close, her glowing eyes fixed on the ground. For a while, neither of them spoke, the silence broken only by the distant groan of shifting ice. Finally, Ethan broke the quiet. "You've been running from them for a long time, haven't you?" Sarah's gaze lifted, and she gave a slow nod. "They took my mother first," she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. "She tried to hide me, but they found us." Ethan leaned forward. "Why? What do they want from you?" Sarah hesitated, her hands curling into fists. "They say I am the last," she murmured. Ethan frowned. "The last what?" Her eyes met his, glowing brighter in the dim light. "My people are gone," she said, her words steady now. They were not many, but we had a gift. Our voices could shape the world's shatter metal, move the air, change the paths of storms. She paused, her voice almost a whisper. "That gift is in me now, and they want to use it." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "They want to turn you into a weapon," he said. Sarah nodded slowly. "They want my voice to break ships, to destroy cities. If they take me, I will not live as myself." She looked away, her shoulders trembling. "My mother told me, if I could not escape, I must not be taken alive." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Ethan saw the fear she had been hiding under her calm. He reached across the space and put a hand on her arm. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. "I'm not going to let them have you." Sierra studied him for a long moment. "You don't know what they will do to you if you keep me," she said. Ethan gave a faint smile. "Maybe I do. But I've already decided, for the first time since he met her." She looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure how to handle someone choosing to stay. "You could leave while it's still dark," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Not happening." They sat in silence again, the air between them warmer now. Ethan thought about everything she had told him. Her voice wasn't just a strange talent, it was power someone out there was willing to kill for. He had seen her shatter machines with sound. But he also saw the toll it took on her. She was still just a girl, running for her life. After a while, Sierra unwrapped a small object from the cloth tied around her wrist. It was a pendant, carved from clear crystal. Inside, faint lines formed. Shaped symbols he didn't recognize. "This is all I have left from my people," she said, holding it gently. "It holds the songs." Ethan tilted his head. "Songs?" Sierra nodded. "Not like yours. These are the voices of my ancestors, recorded in crystal. If the hunters take it, they will know everything." Ethan understood. Now this wasn't just about her. She was carrying the last memory of her people. The hunters didn't just want her power. They wanted her history erased or controlled. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from far away. Sierra's head snapped up, her body tense. "They move again," she said. Ethan got to his feet, slinging his pack over his shoulder. "How far?" She shook her head. "Not far enough." They began moving through the ice forest, Sierra leading with the strange awareness she seemed to have of the land. At times, she stopped suddenly, her head turning as if she could hear something Ethan couldn't. Other times, she pressed her hand to the ice, feeling the vibrations. Every move was cautious, deliberate. After hours of weaving between frozen towers, they reached a small cliff overlooking a frozen river. The ice glimmered faintly under the pale light. Sierra crouched, pointing to a narrow bridge of ice spanning the river. "If we cross, we can reach the mountain caves," she said. "They are safe." For a while, Ethan nodded, but before they could move, a flicker of red light cut across the snow. A drone, then another, and behind them, dark shapes emerged between the ice trees, moving fast. Sierra's eyes narrowed. "They found us." Ethan pulled his sidearm, his heart pounding. There was no more hiding, only running. Sierra stepped close, her voice firm. "If we survive this, I will tell you the rest." Ethan met her gaze. "We will survive," he said, and for the first time, she almost smiled. But as they turned toward the bridge, the sound of the hunter's footsteps grew louder. The truth about Sierra had given Ethan more reason to protect her, but it had also made the danger feel sharper. Now he knew exactly what they were chasing, and he knew they would never stop. The bridge of ice groaned under their boots as Ethan and Sierra hurried across. The frozen river below was a dark abyss, the sound of rushing water echoing from somewhere deep beneath. Halfway across, Sierra stopped suddenly, her head turning toward the forest behind them. "They are running now," she said, her voice tight. "They will reach us before we cross." Ethan glanced back and saw them shadows moving between the ice trees, closing the distance fast. The hunters, their black armor blending into the night. Energy weapons glinted in their hands, red beams cutting through the snow. And lower to the ground, fast-moving shapes, night fangs. Their glowing eyes locked on the heat of their prey. Ethan's heart pounded. "Go, Sierra," he shouted. She hesitated, then sprinted across the remaining span of the bridge, her light steps barely making a sound. Ethan followed, but the ice cracked under his weight. A long fracture shot across the surface, sending a shiver through his legs. He pushed harder, leaping onto solid ground just as part of the bridge collapsed into the river below. They reached the base of the mountain caves, jagged stone rising like black teeth into the night. Sierra didn't stop. She led him through a narrow gap between two cliffs. The passage opened into a wide cave with high walls and a natural arch overhead. "This is where we fight," she said quietly. Ethan frowned. "Fight? I thought you said it was safe here." Her eyes glowed faintly. "It will be safe. If they do not leave this place alive." Ethan understood. They weren't going to keep running. This would be the final stand. He set his pack down and quickly checked what little he had left: one sidearm with 3 energy cells, 2 thermal charges, and a knife. Not much, but it would have to be enough. Sierra moved to the cave entrance. Her bare hand brushing the stone, she closed her eyes and began to hum a low, steady note that seemed to sink into the rock. The sound made the walls vibrate faintly. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. "Marking the cave," she said. "When I release my voice at full strength, the walls will fall." Ethan's stomach tightened. That meant if things went wrong, they might both be buried. But there was no time to argue. The hunters "We're almost here." He planted the thermal charges at narrow choke points along the walls, setting them to remote trigger. Then he took position behind a cluster of boulders near the entrance. The first drone appeared, gliding silently into the cave. Ethan aimed and fired. The beam punching through its lens, it crashed into the rocks with a burst of sparks. The sound drew the hunters in, their heavy boots crunching closer. 3 of them entered first. Scanning the shadows with their weapons raised, Sierra stepped forward, her small frame illuminated by the glow of her skin. The hunters saw her and raised their weapons. She opened her mouth and unleashed a sharp, high note that rattled Ethan's teeth. The sound hit the hunters like a wall to stumbled, clutching their helmets while the third dropped his weapon entirely. Ethan took the opening, firing quick shots. 2 hunters went down, their armor smoking, but more were already moving in. From behind them, the night fangs darted through the shadows, their growls echoing in the cave. Ethan switched focus, firing at the nearest beast, but one leaped at him, knocking the weapon from his hands. Its jaws snapped inches from his face before Sierra's voice hit it like a hammer, sending it sprawling. The cave was chaos, now energy beams flashing, the roar of predators and the deep rumble of the stone walls. Ethan grabbed his knife and drove it into the chest joint of a hunter's armor, shoving him back into another. Sierra stood in the center of the fight, her voice shifting in pitch and power, the sound waves cracking stone and shattering weapons. But every burst of sound left her weaker. Ethan could see her knees shaking, her breaths coming fast. The hunter leader appeared at the entrance. Massive figure in reinforced armor, his helmet reflecting the cave's glow. He raised a heavy weapon and fired, the blast hitting the wall near Sierra and showering her with debris. Ethan charged, slamming into the leader's side, the weapon skidding across the floor. They struggled, the hunter's strength far greater than his. The leader threw Ethan hard against the wall, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. Sierra's voice rang out again, but the leader pushed through it. He grabbed her by the arm and yanked her toward the entrance. Ethan forced himself up, his vision spinning. He saw Sierra's eyes meet his wide, desperate but still full of fight. With the last of his strength, Ethan hit the trigger on the remote detonator. The thermal charges exploded, fire and rock filling the cave with a deafening roar. The shockwave threw the hunters and night fangs to the ground. Sierra broke free of the leader's grip, stumbling toward Ethan. The walls began to crack, huge slabs of stone breaking loose overhead. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a narrow side tunnel. They dove inside just as the main chamber collapsed behind them. The sound was like thunder. And then, silence. They lay in the dark tunnel, breathing hard. Sierra's voice was barely above a whisper. "You kept your word." Ethan gave a faint, tired smile. "So did you." But even in the darkness, they both knew this wasn't the end. Some of the hunters might have survived, and if they had, the chase would begin again. Asterisk. The tunnel was narrow, cold, and pitch black. Ethan and Sierra lay side by side. Catching their breath, dust from the cave collapse still hung in the air, making each inhale sharp in the lungs. For a while, neither spoke, they just listened to the silence. It was the first time since they met that no hunters, drones, or night fangs could be heard. Ethan finally shifted, wincing at the ache in his ribs. "Think they're gone?" he asked, his voice low. Sierra tilted her head, listening in that strange way she did. Her glowing eyes dimmed a little. "Most?" "Yes," she whispered. "Some. Maybe not." Ethan gave a small nod. "That's enough for now," he said. "We just need time to rest." They crawled deeper into the tunnel until it opened into a small chamber. The walls here were smooth ice. Catching faint light from cracks overhead, Ethan unrolled the sleeping bag and gestured for Sarah to get inside. She didn't hesitate, slipping in and patting the space beside her. "You will freeze if you don't," she said simply. He lay down beside her, and as soon as he did, she moved closer. Her head rested against his chest, her small frame fitting against him like she had been made to be there. The steady beat of his heart seemed to calm her. "You are still warm," she murmured, almost like it was a miracle. Ethan smiled faintly. "You're still here," he replied, "for a few minutes." There was only the sound of their breathing. Then Sierra spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "When I said I would keep you alive, I meant more than the hunt." Ethan glanced down at her. "What do you mean?" Her fingers curled into the fabric of his coat. "Before you found me, I had nothing," she said. "No food, no shelter, no reason to run anymore. I thought maybe it would be better if they caught me. But then you came and gave me warmth." Her words carried a weight that made Ethan's chest tighten. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. She shook her head. "No, not anyone. Many would trade me for safety. You didn't." Ethan didn't answer right away. He thought of the hunters, of the battles they'd fought in the last 2 days. And he realized she was right. Helping her had never been the easy choice. It had been the only choice his conscience would allow. They rested for a while, letting the ache in their bodies ease. When they woke, pale light was filtering through a gap in the ice above. Sierra climbed up first, moving like she belonged to the frozen world. Ethan followed, and together they emerged onto a high ridge overlooking the valley. The land stretched endlessly, mountains, ice fields, and the faint glimmer of a distant horizon. For the first time, there were no drones in the sky, no figures moving through the snow. Sierra breathed deeply, her eyes closing for a moment. "It is quiet," she said. Ethan glanced at her. "Think it'll last?" She gave a small smile. "Nothing lasts forever, but sometimes that's good." They began moving across the ridge, heading toward the distant mountains. Ethan knew there were still dangers out there, but with each step, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. Sierra stayed close, always within arm's reach. She no longer glanced over her shoulder in fear. Now she looked forward. It was a small change, but Ethan noticed. By midday, they found a sheltered alcove under a cliff. It was hidden from the wind and deep enough to make a safe camp. Ethan started a small fire with the last of his heat cells. The orange glow lit Sierra's face, and for a moment, she didn't look like someone who had been hunted all her life. She looked peaceful. She pulled out the crystal pendant from her wristcloth and held it between them. "You kept me alive," she said, "so I give you this. It is part of my people. If I am lost, it will keep the song safe." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not taking that. Tits yours." Sierra smiled faintly. "Then keep it until you return me to my mother." Ethan paused. "You think she's still alive?" Sierra's eyes softened. "I have to believe she is. If I don't, then I have nothing left to run toward." He took the pendant carefully, the cold crystal resting in his palm. "I'll help you find her," he promised. Sierra didn't answer. She just leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. The fire crackled softly, its warmth wrapping around them like the sleeping bag had that first night as the light outside faded. Sierra spoke one last time before sleep took her. "When I am with you, the cold does not reach me," she said. Ethan closed his eyes. "Then stay close," he murmured, and she did, outside. The frozen moon stretched on forever, but in their small alcove, there was warmth. It wasn't just the fire or the sleeping bag. It was the kind of warmth that came from knowing someone had chosen to stay, no matter the danger, no matter the cost, for Ethan and Sierra. The cold world was no longer just a place to survive. It was a place they could face together.